Imagine waking up to a glow on your bedroom ceiling. Not the sunrise, something closer, brighter, pulsing. You open the door and hear almost nothing. No explosions. No roaring flames. Just a soft hiss. And then you see it. A red river sliding through the dark like a living thing, folding around your fence post, slipping across your driveway, moving impossibly like water. This is not a scene from a disaster movie. These happened on Hawaiʻi Island, and the strangest part wasn't how hot, how bright, or how destructive it was. It was how quiet it felt, how calmly the island unfurled a river of fire. Stick with me, because what happens next will shock you. To understand the moment lava moved like water, we have to start where it seemed most peaceful. For decades, Kīlauea had a reputation as a friendly volcano Hawaii. Yes, open-air sculptor. If you visited in the early 2010s, you might remember the summit lava lay, glowing like a lantern inside Alamauma, and the long-lived Puʻu eruption that began back in 1983, building black plains of fresh rock and sending gentle tongues of fōiho down old slopes. Artists painted it. Tourists hiked to it. Locals checked the wind for volcanic smoke. Vagan went about their day. It was dangerous, yes, but legible, predictable. Almost polite. Underneath that familiarity, the volcano was storing secrets. Imagine a breathing mountain. Each inhale magma rising, summit swelling was invisible unless you knew where to look. Tilt meters traced the inflations like chest movements, and GPS stations edged millimeters at a time. Deep below, liquid rock searched for an escape. On April 30th, 2018, the trapdoor opened. The floor of Puʻu crater collapsed in a sudden drop, a good punch exhale that sent a pressurized pulse down Kīlauea's east rift zone. Seismographs lit up like a lie detector at a poker table. In Loea, Puna, Aurora patchwork of farms and cul-de-sacs, carved into a jungle of high A and guava. The ground began to split. White steam vented from fresh cracks in asphalt. A ribbon of new earth blinked into existence across Leilani Estates and Lanapuna Gardens. People pulled over on Highway 132, filmed the pavement buckling in slow motion. Residents walked their dogs past mailboxes, tilted by the swelling ground. A familiar neighborhood suddenly felt like the deck of a ship, quietly rearranging itself. The civil defense sirens cut through the mugginess, and a message followed. Prepare to evacuate. Gas masks in 95s, and half-face respirators sold out in hours. Birds fell silent near warm fissures opening in people's yards. On Mai 13, a crack outside a cul-de-sac began to spit fire. Not a towering fountain, just sputtering, like a giant struck match. Orange bursts sputtered out onto damp grass, as if the earth were testing its voice. Then it learned to sing. More fissures opened that evening, and into the next day, and the next. Ragged seams of incandescent rock freeing themselves from the earth, some dozens of feet high, some just a glowing grin through the cinders. Sulfur dioxide, invisible but acrid, rolled down the streets, corroded the back of throats, stung eyes, and set off car alarms as heat built around driveways. Wires snapped. Transformers fizzed blue. A burning eucalyptus groaned and collapsed like a felled giant. People grabbed what they could carry. Hard drives, ukuleles, baby photos, passports, uncle's fishing poles, auntie's quilt. They drove out past geysers of lava clawing into air, past a neighbor's swing set outlined in orange. Fire crews kept their distance. There were no flames to chase here. Not in the usual way. You couldn't spray water on the earth and put it out. The ground was the fire, and yet there was a strangeness in the way it moved. Even in its first messy hours, the lava flowed with a deceptive calm. It didn't always growl. It didn't always crackle. It slid. It eased forward. It found paths of least resistance and followed them, the way rain seeps along a curb until it's gathered into a runnel. That's what unnerved people. Destruction they could hear, they could reason with. But this was a quiet, relentless insistence. A silent Inferno. For days, the eruption seemed to move house by house, block by block, as different fissures gushed and paused. Fountains turned to thick dribbling cones of black and orange. Some briefly roared, then sagged into steaming knuckles that exhaled deadly gas. Pets vanished and reappeared on porches, confused. Their footprints brimmed with ash. A refrigerator sat in the middle of a street that had become a chessboard of cooled plates and red seams. It all felt surreal, slow, and urgent at once. Meanwhile, scientists tracked the invisible river beneath it all. The magma had left the summit and was traveling down a rift like honey, finding a crack in a tabletop. They knew that if the system found a stable vent, one point of sustained, high volume discharge, everything would change. Flows that once fanned out would focus. Energy would channel. The texture of destruction would transform from a sprawling smear to a single, blazing blade. And then it happened. One vent Fissure 8 began to outpace the others, to pull fuel from the deep like a marathoner. Finding a second wind no one thought was possible. It did not just leak. It surged. It built a cinder cone. It threw fire so high the plume painted its own weather. And at its base, something appeared that still haunts those who saw it up close. A river of lava so steady, so organized that it grew rapids, bends, and standing waves like a living stream. Before we continue, make sure you're fully focused because this next part changes everything. You're about to see rock behave like water. By late May, the eruption found its voice, and it was a churning, relentless baritone. Fissure 8 lined along the crack that split Leilani Estates, gathered weight, and built a cone fast enough to earn a name, a Hawaiʻi, an altar of the forest god. At night, the fountain looked like a fire hydrant for the earth, a sustained sheet of orange rising tens of meters into the trade winds, scattering molten droplets that cooled Midor and hissed into the channel. In daylight, it was a roaring industrial machine, ripping gas from melt, welding black cinders into a steep ring with the efficiency of a factory that never sleeps. But it wasn't the fountain that broke people's idea of what lava is. It was what the fountain fed. A molten river, banked between walls of its own making, flowing so fast and so smooth that shop owners 20 miles away watched drone footage like it was a fantasy. The channel braided, then narrowed to a chute. On tight bends, rafts of cooled crust brown and wrinkled like torn bread barged along, colliding and spinning in eddies. Along straightaways, the surface flattened into crimson glass, and then buckled into ropey foiho as speed and cooling conspired. In blazes. Glosses. The flow set up stationary waves, glowing ridges fixed in place while the liquid raced through them. The same hydraulics you find in a mountain creek. It shouldn't have been possible, you think. Stone doesn't do this, but basalt at 1200 degrees Celsius with the right chemistry and momentum will show you otherwise. Scientists leaned into their instruments. Thermal cameras read the river's skin like a hospital monitor. Thinner crust showed as hotter streaks, thicker plugs as cooler patches. By timing drifting crust rafts, they clocked speeds that, near to bent, reached double-digit miles per hour. That's slow compared to water, yes, but for lava, it was unsettlingly quick. As the flow dropped into deeper goulies, eroded into old lava fields, it accelerated and thinned, then rethickened as it leveled out. The river produced levees, walls of solidified lava along the margins built by overflow that cooled rows and kept the core confined. Those levees insulated the channel, preventing heat loss, and the more insulated it got, the faster and farther it ran. The system became self-organizing, strangely elegant, and terrifyingly efficient. And it was quiet, not silent like a vacuum, but quiet like surf heard from far off. A low, continuous rush. The loud sounds came in bursts. A tree exploding as superheated sap flashed to steam. A gas slug popping like a muted cannon. Clinker avalanche as air broke and tumbled when the channel spilled its banks. But most of the time, the destruction arrived on soft feet. It surrounded a house like a warm tide at night. Windows glass sagged and slumped before shattering. Vinyl siding sagged and flowed. A red lens crept across the living room wall, swallowing family photos one at a time into a matte black surface that, minutes later, would be walkable if you didn't mind the soles of your shoes fusing to the new earth. Downslope, the river found its target. The low coastal plain near but along its path, it hesitated at places designed to complicate berms, reservoirs, and, yes, a geothermal power plant whose wells reached down to the heat that fed them. Crews raced to quench and cap those wells with cold water and heavy mud. to prevent the eruption from turning power infrastructure into an uncontrolled blowtorch. They succeeded, but not by much. 4 days. The plant disappeared in a glowing fog. The river's heat burned the air until laminar waves shimmered, a mirage effect that made the channel look like it was floating. At Kapoho, the lava road met the ocean and kept going. What had looked like a field trip destination, Kapoho Tide Pools, a necklace of clear basins loved by families and turtles, vanished beneath fresh black cloth. The process was surgical and brutal. Green Lake, a deep freshwater crater where generations swam, boiled, steamed, and was gone in a day, filled by the Red River until its surface was a gray scab, then a hard lid, then part of the path downhill. At the ocean edge, the drummy took on a new chemistry. The river poured over a cliff of its own previous efforts, old flows that had built this coastline and dove into surf. Water met rock at 1,000 degrees. Instantly, seawater flashed to steam and tore sodium chloride into hydrochloric acid. Glass microsplinters formed in the white cloud. The plume laze drifted inland with the wind, stinging lungs more sharply than Sometimes explosions tore the entry apart, throwing lava bombs the size of armchairs back onto the cliff in a deadly rain. The island extended itself by dozens of acres in a matter of days. New land built on a foundation of shattered pillow, lava, and trembling black sand. Meanwhile, back at the vent, people gathered on safe vantage points and watched, transfixed. Drones hovered over the channel at dusk, like insects over a campfire. Onti screen patterns unfolded that belonged to both physics class and myth's spiral eddies, combed ripples, ropes forming and rolling under their own weight. You could see the river wrestling with its crust, skin forming, tearing, reforming, always skimming, always feeding the core. You could see, in the river's heat shimmer, how thin the line is between order and chaos. When nature finds a groove. Inside living rooms in Puʻu, the glow through the curtains became a clock. People learned the sound of the channel from a mile away. "It sounds like the ocean," one woman said, coughing gently into a towel held across her mouth. But the ocean doesn't keep coming uphill. The river, of course, obeyed gravity, and as it lowered the reservoir that fed it, something far away began to complain. At the volcano's summit, the floor of the world, people knew the old parking lot at Jagger Museum, the Vista Point. The trail's stay didn't burn. He fell. Because while the river ran toward the ocean, the mountain's crown began to sink. And each day, at almost the same hour, the island shuddered with an impact you could set your watch to. Don Baha. Don de Guanwer. Because the next part will show you how a caldera collapses, in slow motion, as if a giant were walking across the island. At 10:30 a.m., like the tolling of a bell, Kīlauea summit would take a breath. It would hold that breath through tremor drumbeat earthquakes, tapping a rhythm into the rock. This was Kīlauea, exhaling as magma drained from its summit reservoir down the east rift to feed the river in Puʻu. When fluid leaves a cavity, the roof sags. Every day, the plumbing adjusted. The summit had lost its lava lake weeks earlier. The incandescent basin that lit the night vanished down a widening throat, rock walls snapping and sliding, the glow retreating like a lantern carried away into a tunnel. What replaced it was architectural collapse. Alama, Uma. Didn't just crack. It grew, its pit walls sliding inward in huge blocks, its floor dropping, step by step, until the familiar crater became an amphitheater of ruin. The volume of the pit increased more than tenfold. Scientists set up cameras and watched. From a safe distance, you could see rock moving at geologic speeds that felt human. Cliff faces peeling off in sheets, dust rising in curtains, a boulder the size of a bus letting go and bouncing once, twice, before vanishing into shadow. De Hawaii. Volcanoes closed long term. The Jagger Museum, that beloved building with the coin-operated binoculars and the cross-sections of lava tubes, developed cracks and, ultimately, stood condemned. On seismic plots, the collapse explosions were so regular, they looked like a metronome. Locals joked grimly that they could time lunch to an earthquake. There was a mythic symmetry in play. A river pouring out one side of the volcano, the summit sinking in response. Pressure, flow, Feedback. Beneath the island, miles of molten rock threaded the way water threads an old sponge, except this sponge clarifies its structure only when stressed. And stressed it was. The channel in Puʻu carved deeper into its own hardened edges, polishing them into black glass. Lobe after lobe of lava chased the path of the one before it. The walls, built by earlier overflows, rose taller, narrowing the channel like a canyon. If you looked closely, you could see little scallops along the levees marks, not unlike river-etched terraces. In the lower country, the destruction acquired a ritual. A red tongue would feel along the edge of a community. Halt as it inflated a little pad foey, hotos thickening, then break. Surge forward, wrap around an object like a tree or a propane tank, and stop again. It was a dance of patience. Houses went that way, oddly unburned until the last moment. Smoke bursting from eaves like breath in winter. Rooflines slumping as the still-cool floor caved and the fire worked up from beneath. Neighbors held hands, wept, and told stories as the edge approached. It was an intimate disaster. At Kapoho, the intimacy increased, then ended with a suddenness that seemed impossible. The bay, a wide, protective open arm of the coastline filled ship by ship of lava. You could watch the shoreline scoot out day by day, then hour by hour. The Kapoho lighthouse became a memory. The tide pools, a mosaic that held people's childhoods, were overwritten. The lava entered the sea with relentless grace, and the island grew in jerks, bone graft on bone. Out on the ocean, boaters approached the entry as close as they dared. From a safe distance, the scene was both beautiful and hard to look at. Waves of incandescent rock collapsing, meteor showers of glowing spatter sailing into steam, then snuffed to black. The laze plume roiling like a storm cloud and fast forward, full of microneedles of glass that would punish any lungs foolish enough to inhale it. The sea hissed in prolonged sighs, then screamed with a bang as gas trapped under fresh slabs found its voice and broke free. And in the channel itself, something deeply odd fascinated those who watched carefully. Intuition says rock can't form whirlpools, eddies, or rapids, but here they were hydraulic jumps, forming where slope changed to flat. Standing waves pinned in place, no matter how many rafts of crust broke and reknitted across them. The surface folded and rolled like taffy on a moving table. In tight chutes, the channel pinched and slung the river forward, then spilled it into basins where the speed dropped and the skin grew thick enough to wrinkle. You could read the channel the way a whitewater kayaker reads a river, except the consequences here were culturally. The eruption was not just physics. It was family, history, and deities made manifest. On a curb near a steaming crack, someone left a tea leaf bundle with a string of kukui nuts and a cup of rum. Antizin mu umu, who sang softly at the edge of the flow. Tenameahu, ʻŌʻō, are chosen by community leaders, recognized the forest god whose domain had been claimed by fire. People spoke of Peel not as metaphor, but as neighbor-prode, capricious, powerful whose visits ramada, reward, and demand. Questions mounted. How long could this river run? Would the channel hold? Where else might the rift open? What happens if the levees fail and the flow reoccupies older, higher ground? A rumor, always ready, said the summit would blow in a way it hadn't in a century. The USGS nodded soberly toward data and said, "This is not that kind of eruption. The danger here is not a big bang. It is the speed of a river and the cunning of silent fire." But the biggest surprise was still inside the lava river itself, something water does. Easily but molten rock, shouldn't he? In the coming section, we'll dissect a mystery. How could those fixed, glowing waves set up and persist for days? And what did they reveal about a fluid we only think we understand? Stay with me, because the physics of this next part will change how you see both rivers and fire forever. If you freeze the channel in your mind just one segment, one bend, you begin to see the pattern. The river bursts from the vent at a punishing rate, a thick incandescent sheet riven by filaments of darker crust. As it travels, a thin, glassy skin congeals across the surface, like pudding, forming a film. But the core is still running. When the skin gets stressed by a bend, by a rock, by a sudden flattening of sloped buckles, it piles into ropes foiho, the signature of fluid basalt. Each rope is a record of tension relieved, Now picture what happens at a break-in slope. Upstream, the lava moves swiftly, pressed by gravity and by the pressure of melt behind it. Downstream, the slope eases, and the flow wants to spread. In water, that's a recipe for a hydraulic jump, a sudden transition from fast, shallow flow to slower, thicker flow, marked by a standing wave that sits in place as long as discharge stays steady. In 2018, you could see that same phenomenon in lava. A line of brightness at crest held its ground while the river rolled through, the crust above it constantly torn and renewed. It was a feedback system. The wave thickened the flow. The thickened flow steepened the reach upstream, encouraging faster velocities, keeping the crest pinned. People with engineering backgrounds watched the footage and muttered, half awe and half dread. That's a hydraulic jump. Molten rock was performing a trick they'd studied with garden hoses. The river spawned other riverine features too. Islands formed little rafts of more viscous lava that grounded in the middle of the channel, got fused, then melted into low domes that split the flow into two threads. On the outer curves of bends, the channel scoured deeper, eating into its own levee. On inner curves, the river piled its crust, building the bank higher. When discharge pulsed, levees overtopped, sheeted lava out in glossy tongues that then froze and thickened the walls further. Each overtop made the channel more confined, more insulated, and paradoxically more capable of carrying even hotter lava, farther, faster, with less loss to the air. Those rafts of crust were uncanny. Some carried tree molds, the ghostly ovals of trunks they had swallowed and transported before the core burned them out. Some looked like cracked pottery, stacked plates of brown and black, scrolling along until a whirlpool snagged them and spun them to ribbons. Accretionary lava, those spiky spheres, formed by rolling globs of goo, picking up layers bobbed along in the eddies, bumping the levees with a sound like muted drum beats. Over everything, a gold heat shimmer made the air seem to fry. Basalt at Kīlauea is a gift for this behavior. It's low silica, low viscosity for a magma, and tends to flow as a Newtonian fluid at the shear rates found in channels, meaning its resistance to flow stays roughly constant, regardless of how hard it is pushed. Water is several orders of magnitude less viscous. Yes, basaltic lava can be 100 to 1,000 pascal seconds, compared to water's thousandth of a pascal. But under the right heat, and with a roof of formed crust, molten basalt can act like a very slow river, thick as molasses. But here's the key. It holds together long enough to set up the structures rivers build as casually as breathing. In Hawaii, he had seen this before, not in drone footage, but in memories passed down. In Ijo'uling, Mauna Loa, Kīlauea's massive neighbor broke open along its southwest rift. Lava raced down steep flanks and crossed the Mamalihoa Highway to the sea in as little as 3 hours in some branches. Old-timers remember it as a torrent fast enough to outrun in a truck, but suddenly hoosed, moving with the frightening deliberateness of a flood. In 1926, another Mauna Loa flow buried the fishing village of ʻŌʻō. Each episode carried the same lesson. When slope, supply, and chemistry line up, lava doesn't use it runs. Even on gentler slopes, Hawaii, he knows the stealthy, water-like tricks of In 2014-2015, the June 27th, flow from Puʻu crept Foa not as a river but as a quilt of lobes and toes, the kind of flow that inflates quietly, tunneled and can show up. Behind a house, like a person sneaking through a hedge, you could hear that one if you listened. Gas hissing, glass cracking, but it was the silence of it until it wasn't that unnerved the town. The lava avoided Tentara headed a transfer station, entombing a handful of cars, with the patience of a sculptor. In 2018, the concentrated channel offered a visual education. You could literally watch the hydraulics at work. Engineers from halfway across the world emailed volcanologists. What you're seeing is open channel flow with a crust, they said. Here's a model we used for wastewater that might fit. The volcanologists nodded and grinned grimly. They'd been borrowing shallow water equations for years, adjusting for lava's viscosity and the heat budget. Now the footage confirmed it, standing waves and all. The channel was an outdoor lab, and the stakes were people's homes. And yet, for all the physics, you never forget the human scale. A man stood on a safe ridge with his 6-year-old, both in respirators, watching the river through binoculars. "It's beautiful," the child said, and the father nodded because it was. "Will it come here?" the child asked, and the father answered honestly. "It depends. It depends on discharge, on levee strength, on slope, on the channel's taste and paths. It depends on events happening miles away under the summit collapses that eased pressure and pulses of magma that boosted it. It depends, in short, on systems we understand and systems we don't." By July, Oahu had built itself a crown of black cinder and a base of stubborn rock. The river hummed like a factory assembly line. At night, its glow made clouds blush. At the coast, the island kept growing, then in fits, then steadily again. And still the physics of that fixed, glowing wave near a certain bend held a beacon in the river's throat, taunting intuition. Yet there was a deeper question keeping scientists up late. If lava can be red like water, can it be predicted the way we forecast floods? Can we say, with something like confidence, which street it will prefer, which corner it will cut, which house it will circle rather than swallow? Or will the crustal waves forming and breaking play tricks with our models, turning a certainty into a maybe at the last second? Before we answer that, and before we visit the end of this particular river and what it built and broke, take a breath. The final pod pulls back the camera. What was lost, what was created, and what we now know about forecasting a liquid that wears a rock's face. Dante blinked because the ending holds a twist about Hawaiʻi Island's future that you want to see coming. The river didn't end so much as it ebbed. Through June and July, Fissure 8 roared like a blast furnace, the channel glowing from dusk till dawn. Then August approached, and the system began to run out of momentum. The summit's daily collapses stuttered and stopped. The drumbeat quieted. Discharge from the vent tapered. The standing waves fell lower, their edges dulled as the crust held longer. In early August, the ocean entry dwindled to a sigh. Be mid-month, Fountain had shrunk to a glow within a cone of black clinker, and finally, it flickered out. By September, the channel had cooled to ferry crossing solidity, a new highway carved by fire, frozen and When people went back, they walked on a landscape that looked like it had been made at night by a giant. The new coastline swept in a fresh arc where Kapoho Bay once was, a blunt chin of rock thrust into the sea, where green, clear water had held fish and rainbows of coral. There was steam and black sand and the raw noise of surf slamming into newborn rock. In place of neighborhoods, a wrinkled plain of glass and stone rolled to the horizon. Here and there, mango trees survived on humps of older ground, their leaves charred but stubborn. A mailbox poked up like a periscope from a sea of black. The statistics sank in slowly. The 2018 Lower East Rift Zone eruption lasted about 3 months. It destroyed more than 700 homes. It covered roughly 35 square kilometers, about 13.5 square miles, of land in new lava, and built around 3.5 square kilometers, some 875 acres of brand new coastline. The estimated volume was on the order of 1 cubic kilometer of lava, an amount you feel in your ankles when you stand on it. Roads vanished. A power plant paused and survived. A community grieved and regathered. A cone rose that locals named themselves, and which future maps now must include. Back at the summit, change was even more dramatic. Alema, ʻŌʻō, had become a yawning pit hundreds of meters deeper and much wider. The parking lot at Jagger and buildings nearby were damaged beyond use. For the first time in recorded history, a lake of water turquoise and uncanny appeared at the bottom of the crater in 2019, a delicate thing floating on decades of flame. It didn't last. In December 2020, Kīlauea opened again at the summit, boiled the lake to steam overnight, and replaced it with a lava lake once more. Since then, short summit eruptions have come and gone in 2021, 2023, and 2024. Each one a reminder that the volcano's breathing continues, that the plumbing adjusts, that no kwai is permanent. And then, because Hawaiʻi Island volcanoes like to rhyme, Mauna Loa woke in late 2022. For the first time since 1984, the great mountain cracked open near its summit and sent braided rivers of lava down toward the saddle. The flows lit the night in orange ribbons, visible from planes. They crossed like giant highways under construction, and came within a few miles of the Daniel K. Niue Highway before slowing, stalling, and stopping. It was a gift lava moving like water again, fast and showy, but on uninhabited slopes where the lesson could be learned without the cost. People pulled off safely to watch, the way you might watch a storm from a porch. Jackets zipped against the chill, the glow warming their faces. So what did we learn from the season when lava flowed like a river and a mountain fell in stanzas? We learned that lava, for all its mystery, is a fluid you can model if you're humble about your assumptions. Volcanologists used aerial thermal maps, satellite INSAR, and field measurements to feed shallow water equations adapted for lava's heat and viscosity. They read the channel like hydrologists read a flood, looking for where overbanking was likely, where the levee might be weakest, where a change in slope might seed a hydraulic jump. They timed crust rafts to get velocities, then cross-checked with flow rates estimated from channel cross-sections. They built forecasts that didn't pretend to be perfect but aimed to be useful. In the next 12 hours, Advance is likely to follow this path to the ocean. Expect overtopping at this corner if discharged pulses in Manicases. Those calls gave people and responders the hours they needed. In Somacases, the crust fooled the models, a last-minute wrinkle, turning a forecast into a near miss. Every miss became a lesson, folded back into the next map. We learned, again, that the island is alive, in a way no metaphor can hold. To live on Hawaiʻi Island is to accept that the ground has a pulse. That doesn't mean resignation. It means relationship. It means listening. To scientists with instruments, and to kupuna with stories. 2, the sound a fissure makes when it breathes, and 2, the cough a child develops in wagi wind. It means ritual that acknowledges both risk and beauty lays at the base of cones. Tea leaves at new black sand beaches. Quiet prayers whispered at the edge of a field that yesterday was a street. We learned about grief, shaped like lava slow to cool, full of textures. People returned to their lots and found nothing where everything had been, and they built again or moved on. They told and retold the night the glow crept through their curtains. They laughed where they could, the way communities do. About the day they cooked spam on a shovel with ambient heat. About the neighbor who saved the rooster by putting it in a cat carrier in the back seat. About the soap that turned gray with ash. And they cried without apology where they needed to. Scientifically, the idea that lava can behave like water is no longer a metaphor used by journalists to explain the uncanny. It's a tool, one that, handled carefully, can save lives. But it also has limits. Lava is born hot and cools as it travels, changing viscosity as a function of distance and time. It carries crystals that change how it flows. It crusts over and tubes. It opens skylights and hides beneath roofs. It fights the very models we build to predict it. That is the challenge that keeps people up at night. Taking the beauty of those standing waves, those hydraulic jumps, and turning them into equations that are more than pretty. They predict. And here's the twist about Hawaiʻi eyes. Future. The island story is far from finished. Pressure will build somewhere along the rift again, maybe next year, maybe in a decade. The next eruption might prefer a new path, or revisit an old one, or surprise us by choosing neither. It might be a summit fill, quiet and photogenic. It might be a rift-opaning affair, fast and decisive. It will almost certainly teach us something new about how rock flows and how people respond. When lava moves like water again, will we be ready to read its river, to know which bend hides a fixed wave and which ledge will see to jump? Will we recognize the sound of the silent inferno before it arrives at the curb? If you've felt the pulse of this story, don't stop here. Our next episode dives into the hour by hour inside the command centers, how scientists and residents use maps, radios, and sheer instinct to outpace a river of fire. Stick with me, because the decisions they made in the dark will change how you think about disaster, data, and the line between luck and skill.